Hey friends, a couple months ago I got this offer to buy Playbeat's 3 Lite. It came through Plug-in Boutique. All you had to do was buy anything. So I looked around for something and I found Brake Tweaker by Isotope, another drum machine sequencer, and it was 10 bucks. So for 10 bucks I got Playbeat 3 Lite and Brake Tweaker. As for normal, I fire up Playbeat 3 Lite in its standalone mode just to play around with it. Didn't read the manual, didn't watch any YouTube videos, and I thought, what is this thing? At first it seems like a drum machine, kind of a combination of a sampler and a sequencer, where you can import patterns, and it had some cool sounds, so I was kind of impressed. Then I went through testing some of the features, which I'll show you in a minute, and after I played with it for about 15 minutes, I started thinking, what's the difference between this and Drum Machine Designer in Logic? I'm a Logic guy, and I know all of the VSTs and plugins and capabilities of Logic. I realize that most DAWs come with some kind of sampler and sequencer and pattern generator, and is it equivalent to Playbeat? So let me show you. Okay, if you're new to these types of tools, you need to understand that the line between drum machines and samplers is kind of getting a bit blurry. Playbeat is really just a sampler, an 8-track sampler with some pattern capabilities. But its uniqueness, it's called a random groove generator by its author, which is Audio Modern. It has some great features for randomizing patterns that a lot of these other tools don't have. So let me walk you through the basics, and then we'll do a comparison between that and what Drum Machine Designer does in Logic. Okay, the first thing you'll notice is it's kind of nice to look at. It's kind of like dating a supermodel. You got all these orange dots that represent beats and sequences, and the white dots show you what's going on. And there are 8 tracks. It has a mixer, which is kind of handy for adjusting the level of those 8 tracks. And you can control a lot of details, like the density of each note, the pitch, if you want to adjust pitch for detuning, or just have different pitch for, say, the snare or the kick. There's a flam feature, which is pretty handy. If you got hi-hats and you want to do triplets, you can adjust the volume. They're currently all set to 100, but you can randomize the volumes on each one of the 8 tracks. And you can adjust the pan, which you can see on here is mainly in the center, but there's some left and some right. Big red button in the middle is actually the randomizing button. So once you've opened up a patch and you play it, you can randomly change it. With all selected to the left, when you click on the random button, it's going to change everything. Same sounds on the 8 tracks, but different patterns. From the presets, you can select factory presets, user presets, favorites that you've saved, and in each case you can preview by clicking on the play button. And that'll give you a sense of what samples have been loaded into that preset. Remember, the patterns are going to be random, and you can assign any one of those 8 channels to a sample. With the Lite version of Playbeat that I have, you can only use the factory presets or presets that you've downloaded. From the full version of Playbeat 3, you can load your own samples from a sample pack or from Splice or Loop Cloud or whatever source you like. When you select preset and double click, it's going to load both the sample sounds for the 8 tracks and a default pattern. You can choose to lock to change any one of these patterns. Obviously, you can just click on the dots to change, say, the hi-hat pattern. If you say, okay, I want to mute a couple of the melodic pieces and just focus on the rhythm, you could say, okay, I just want to change 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can choose any one of those, lock the other ones, hit random, and you're going to end up with new patterns. The white dots will tell you how long a pattern is on a given track. In this example, Bassline Billy, when I play, you'll see the white dots cross the screen at different rates. That's because some of the tracks are 32-step long and some of them are 16. The white dots on track 5, 6, 7, and 8 are the longest. Tracks 3 and 4 are short. They're only 4 bars, but they repeat. And tracks 1 and 2 start and stop at a different time, but are also 32 steps long. That's a lot of flexibility for a sequencer. If you click on Settings, you'll see you can set up the audio device, whether you're sending CC messages from a MIDI device, and if you have a MIDI input device connected, it will show up here. You can basically map almost everything that this application can do, which is pretty cool. If you click on the MIDI Learn button, you'll see you can click on any object and teach it to execute based on your pad device or your keyboard or whatever you have, and you can save that information. It's pretty good. When you click on a preset, you'll notice that in addition to the factory presets and the user and favorites, there is a button at the bottom that says Browse More Preset. And you'll find that there are a bunch of free downloads from various sources. And for the most part, these are producers and YouTube famous producers that have made a pack of samples and sequences available for your use. I've downloaded them all. They're pretty good. Another feature of Playbeat 3 is how you manage the randomization. So if you look at the presets, and there is a category here called Smart. And essentially, as you navigate through presets, if you click on the Smart icon, it's adding them to a list that narrows the results of the randomization to beats and patterns that you're likely to like. For example, if I look in this Fuse starter pack and I listen to a beat, and then I can click on this little icon to add it to the Smart list. It's going to further narrow what I get when I do the randomization. That's kind of cool. Another feature of the presets and packs is creating your own packs. See, right now I have nothing. Well, I have a few things under the user presets, but essentially when you're working on a beat, you may make changes to this beat and say, okay, I'll maybe change the mix a little bit. And now I want to save that as a preset. So down at the bottom here, you have these little plus signs. So I'm going to save this as preset 2. If I go into the presets area, you'll see preset 2 here down at the bottom I've just created, and that's going to be available so I can easily retrieve it. The thing to keep in mind is you have both groupings of sampled sounds and patterns. They're two separate things. And if you expand the look at this, you can see that you've got ways to categorize your preset. You can give it a name, you can pick the genre, and further qualify it in terms of how you're going to use it. And then you've got load pattern, load sounds as two separate options. What they're trying to do is encourage the user community to create custom packs and share them with one another. And that's kind of a neat feature. You know, I don't know if it's going to take off. I can't really tell you. It's certainly a neat concept that you come up with a combination of presets that you think are particularly good based on samples and patterns that you've created. There's a facility to share that with other Playbeat 3 users. Now, when you have a beat that you want to use, and you may have multiple, you may have 4 or 5 different presets that you want to use in a song, one for the chorus, one for a verse, all that kind of stuff. You can either use Playbeat as a VST or AU instrument within your DAW, or you can export the results. And there's 2 ways to export. You can export the individual stems as audio files,
or you can export MIDI as separate MIDI files. What I've noticed with the Lite version is that when you export an audio file, you really just get one file. With MIDI, you still get one MIDI file, but it is broken out into the 8 separate tracks. Let's take a look at that inside a DAW.
I have a Logic project open here for you to see. And if I play it, it's got 2 melodic sounds, a couple different synths, and on track number 3, I've inserted Playbeat 3. Looks like this. So when you play, it's just going to repeat that beat over and over again. So if you have like a 4-bar beat, it's going to just keep playing that for the duration of the song or for the length that you've chosen to put on loop. Maybe that's not as permanent as you'd like it to be, but the concept here is that you would still play around with that beat, maybe make some changes to it until you were happy with it, and then, save it as one of these presets down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Once you're happy with the beat you have in Playbeat, you'll likely export this. So I click on export. I can export the stems, and you can see I can't individually export the stems. I think that's a feature you can only do in the full version of Playbeat. Instead, you can export as an audio file, and I'm just going to put these in my attempt directory, save. I'm also going to export the MIDI, and in the case of the MIDI, you're just going to get the patterns, but not the sounds. Export as MIDI. It also creates one file, but that one file contains all 8 MIDI parts. So you get 2 files, both created today. So if I click the WAV file, drag it over to my DAW, I'm going to mute Playbeat Lite. And you can loop that file, and you can create all the sections that you want. But the problem is, at least with Playbeat 3 Lite, is that you don't have those separated drum parts. It's all in one. Okay, the MIDI file is a little bit different. If you drag the MIDI file into your DAW, it's going to ask you if you want to import the tempo, but you don't. Stick with the tempo of your DAW. And here you've got the 8 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, 7 of the 8 parts. And by default, it's just assign them in Logic to the first instrument, which happens to be a sampler. So you'd have to go through and say, okay, this is the bass drum, let's say the kick drum, and I would have to choose something, like say drum synth, and choose a kick, right? Let's play that as a solo. Maybe that's not the kick you want. And there's a fair bit of work there. You'd have to essentially assign each one of those drums to a particular sound. You could even potentially, I guess if you used your own samples, use your own samples with that and have each one be a sampler. So there's a lot of options there. The other thing that you get when you use Playbeat inside your DAW is it is synchronized. Let me go back to Playbeat, open it up. You can see the tempo in here is 120, but it is linked to the DAW. So if I change the tempo of the DAW, the tempo of Playbeat changes accordingly, which is what you would expect. Let's take a look at Logic's Drum Machine Designer. I'm just going to open an empty project so you get an idea. I'm starting from scratch. One of the things you'll notice when you go to add a track is that the Drum Machine Designer is not on that list. And that's been that way a long time, not exactly sure why. So what you have to do is check another instrument, like say drum synth. It doesn't matter which instrument you take because you're going to change it as soon as it's open. And then off to the left in the channel strip, you're going to change that to Drum Machine Designer, not to be confused with Drum Kit Designer. When Drum Machine Designer first comes up, it looks like this, and it opens up a library on the left. On the left, you'll be able to choose predefined sounds or predefined kit. But we're going to do things a little bit differently. The whole idea behind Drum Machine Designer is that you can pull in your own samples or factory samples, and there's really no limitation to what those samples might be. So I'm going to open up Finder. Here's a folder I created of acoustic drum sounds that I like. I'm just going to drag those into Drum Machine Designer.
So there's a kick I like. I'm just going to put that over here. And another kick, kind of like. Put that one there. Put a snare right in between the two. Whoops. Snare in between the two. And another snare. And I'm going to choose some hi-hats. Put one there. Another one over here. And another one over here. Okay, and then I can play those sounds with a pad device or your keyboard. So the layout here is a 4x4 matrix. You can execute any of those sounds by picking the input note. If you don't know the input note, you can go into learn mode and just touch the note, and you can make all your alterations to any one of these sounds. Now, if you don't have samples that you've downloaded, you can also use Loop Browser built into Logic, which has 36,107 items if you've downloaded all of the content that comes with Logic or GarageBand, and you might be looking for something specific. So I'm looking for, say, some cymbals. Search for cymbals. I can preview cymbals, see which ones I like, and then also drag those in. Idea here is you can have a combination of samples from different sources. You've got Apple Loops, you've got things you could download, and you've got kits that maybe you bought, or maybe you're using Splice or Loop Cloud as a source for your samples. All of that stuff works with Drum Kit Designer. The world is your oyster. Now you're not limited to just drum sounds. You can you can pull in other things, other samples like vocals. Okay, the neat thing about Drum Machine Designer is you've got kit controls, which are for the entire kit, and you've got pad controls for individual sounds. So if you want to alter something, let's say on that on that hit it sound, you could change the pitch. Lower the pitch maybe. You can add reverb. You know, there's a lot of things you can do to the individual sounds. It's a 4x4 matrix times 3. So where Playbeat 3 is limited to 8 samples at a time, you've really got no limitations with Drum Machine Designer. You can have 16 samples times 4. Now, if making your own kit is not your thing, you can select predefined kits, and there's lots of them. Just like in Playbeat 3, where you might like the factory sounds or be working with some of the factory delivered samples, you've got quite a variety of kits here that you can choose from. Say this bright bass house kit. In my case, it's not playing that vocal, so I'm going to have it learn the note I want on the pad device to execute the vocal. What? There we go. What? Let's stick with this kit for a moment. And close the library. Next thing you're used to in Playbeat is we're just going to create a pattern. First, we're going to right-click and create a pattern region. See, it defaults to 16 steps. Looks a little bit like Playbeat, maybe not as pretty. And you can just pick the sounds. You can do this live if you want. Turn on the loop. So there you go. Only takes a couple minutes and you can create a pattern. Of course, that pattern can be any number of steps you want, and you can have multiple step lengths within an existing sequence, much like Playbeat. Nothing too different there. Another feature, nudge your beats or parts of your beat left and right by clicking on these little nudge buttons.
You can quantize. This one is quite interesting. You can choose what direction the sounds are executed. And you can see I'm changing everything there. But you can go down and just change one part. Say, okay, I want this to cycle back and forth. Although one neat feature you have here is automation. You can add any of these features like smart controls, so you can control all of these parameters with the encoders on your MIDI device. If you're doing a live show, can automate compressor and delay and envelope and all these other things, which is sort of built into Logic. You wouldn't expect that kind of stuff to be built into Playbeat. These are all automation features that already exist in the Logic DAW. Gee, that's great, but you obviously know how to program drums. What if I don't know how to do that? I just want to use existing patterns. And in Playbeat 3, that's one of the pluses, is that every time you open up a user patch, you get both the samples and the patterns. And then you've got the random feature to work your way through the patterns. Well, there's a couple of buttons in Logic Drum Machine Designer you need to be aware of. First one is an inspector. So if you need to change any of that information in terms of quantization, or you want to change the velocities or any of that information, you can do that. This button is the pattern browser. Go into patterns, drums. You'll see all kinds of patterns. You can select one of the patterns and it'll pre-populate. It's kind of nice. Choose another one. When the patterns are longer than the viewable area in the step sequencer, you'll see it's in multiple pages. See them at the top. To some extent, you have beats available to you. What's robot funk? And what's happening here is the selection of the samples that you use in Drum Machine Designer are one thing, and then the patterns are another. They're separated. You can combine them, but initially they are separated. So in this case, remember I selected a kit called Bright Bass House. That was a delivered kit from Logic. I didn't create my own kit. I could use my own kit, but that's the one I chose to use. And I'm working my way through some of the patterns just to see what they do, see what they sound like. There is a strong community of Logic users out there and the ability to share the patterns. You can save your own patterns, you can export them, and you can make templates, which you could combine and, I guess, potentially sell. But for the most part, the Logic community just shares these things for free. One of the benefits of Drum Machine Designer is that you've got the full features of a DAW. So Playbeat 3 has a specific use, which is sample playing and beat creation, which is great. But there are times where I want to use third-party plugins, and I can't really do that in Playbeat. Here, things are wide open. I can use a compressor, overdrive, bit crusher, and I'm not limited to just the plugins that came with Logic. I can use anything that I want. So if I want to use, say, the Valhalla Supermassive, I can open that up, and I can play around with the delay from Valhalla. So it's kind of a wide open, song-oriented capability, whereas Playbeat is very specific to just groove creation. When I talk about making those songs, you can cut and paste beats and sections and just say, okay, I like that pattern. I'm going to use that in there and there. But on this pattern, I'm going to say mute out the kick and the snare. And so, you're playing along in a song and you've got a beat, maybe you come to the chorus or a verse and you want certain parts to be removed or added. So having Drum Machine Designer within a DAW, as it comes with Logic, gives you the ability to create an entire song. Your multiple patterns, multiple beats, multiple kits. You can do the same kind of with Playbeat by basically exporting the Playbeat samples and stems that you create and pulling them into your DAW.
Here's a summary of my comparison between Playbeat 3 by Audio Modern and Logic's Drum Machine Designer. Now, these two apps are actually very different. Playbeat is a plugin. It's a single utility type application for creating beats and grooves in a random pattern method. And Drum Machine Designer is part of the overall DAW solution from Apple for Logic 10. And they both can get you similar results in terms of using samples to create beats and patterns, but they do it in very different ways. And in this summary, I've tried to just highlight what those differences are. I think the primary benefit of Playbeat is this random pattern generator. So rather than pick a bunch of predefined patterns, you're letting the app pick and choose based on your likes and preferences. And in Drum Machine Designer, you're very much picking patterns from a set list. So it's a little bit old style. Playbeat has 8 tracks or samples at a time. Drum Machine Designer is much more capable with 48 tracks and samples. There's really no limitations there. The samples and patterns in one preset for Playbeat is kind of a neat thing. You open up a preset and you get both. Whereas in Drum Machine Designer, those are 2 separate activities. Picking your samples is part of Drum Machine Designer. Creating your patterns is kind of part of the DAW. Playbeat runs on Mac and Windows. Drum Machine Designer is Mac only. Because it's inside Logic, it's very much a Logic instrument as opposed to a VST or AU standalone type app. I would say that Playbeat is kind of fun and pretty easy to learn, which is probably why it's getting a lot of attention. Drum Machine Designer, way more capable, but a much longer learning curve. Now, to get full Playbeat, it's about $80. And Drum Machine Designer, you can't buy it on your own. It's included in Logic. So it's part of the overall Logic package that costs about $199.
Whenever I do a comparison like this, I usually get a lot of attention on YouTube. And you might be in that position as well. I'm not concluding anything here whether one product is better than the other. My job is really just to show you the differences. If you like this kind of video, click on the like button and let me know. And if you want to see more of this, click subscribe and the notification button, and you'll get notified every time I come out with a new video.